Good morning. Will you join me in lighting the chalice to begin our service? The words are in your order of service. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived if faced. If faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon the day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. The words of Maya Angelou that remind us as we gather here that we find ourselves giving birth to that dream that we participate in every time we gather together with our hearts united, headed in the same direction together. That's a part of the dream that we share in this world and in our lives. For those of you that are guests and visitors here, you should know that you have made your way into one of the most welcoming, kindest, and mercy-driven organizations that exist. It's my pride and joy to be able to say that I'm the minister of this organization, and it's my pleasure to serve them. In a moment, those of you who are first and second time visitors, you should know that I'm going to ask, if you would please, to stand where you are and give us your name and not your address. Give us your name. But I've been filling out too many forms recently. Your name, and tell us where you're from, because somebody else in the room is probably from there too. So thank you for being here. Some reminders that I want to bring to your attention before we acknowledge our guests. A reminder for the book drive, the Welcoming Congregation Renewal Book Drive is set up in the foyer. Anyone wishing to donate towards the purchase of a book, or actually purchase a book specifically related to the LGBTQIA plus topics, can do so now. I think I got all the letters in there. The books will then be available in our Clara Barton Library for anyone to borrow, and for those of you that donate or purchase a book today will receive a mini Snickers bar. Part of our joy. Other announcements that I want to bring to your attention. You'll see that Dr. Jones is still looking for a place to light down here. So if you know some things, please call him. We see the music notes that John played. John, thank you. That was beautiful. The March on Washington, the acknowledgement of that on August 26th. And this coming week, I will be speaking on the theme of covenanting, and we are becoming a welcoming, more and more welcoming congregation. I think that's all the announcements I need to make. Have I missed something? Now, if I may take a moment to have those of you who are first or second time visitors with us, if you're willing to stand where you are, I'm going to kind of move from my right to my left, and we'll introduce you. So if you would please stand. Yes, oh, excellent, very good. I'm going to call on you, if you would, please.
Hi, I'm Ron Leibel, live in Sun City.
I'm Mary Lou Chapman, and I live in Sun City also.
Ron and Mary Lou, good to see you both again. In the back.
I'm Charlie, this is Emerson, Fred, and Rowan, and we're from North Carolina and California.
Welcome, good to have you here. Yes, please.
Hi there, my name is Jordan and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona.
Welcome here. Yes, ma'am.
Sue Holland, I was here last week also from Florida and upstate New York and living now in the new development in Sun City.
Thank you, Sue. Welcome back. Others that I might have missed. Thank you all for being here. It is a joy and a pleasure to have you in this place, and would ask that you would be able to find the gift of grace in this place with this congregation. Clay, I know you have something that you want to introduce, and so I'm going to turn it over to you and someone to introduce.
Good morning. I'm Clay Bernard, president of the congregation, the board. And the board has recently passed a resolution to create a safety committee. This will be a standalone committee. It won't be a part of building and grounds anymore. The committee will be responsible for all aspects of safety. And two of our new members have stepped up and agreed to chair the safety committee. Steve Clark and Andrea Baker. We will need volunteers for this committee, and I encourage you to join them. Here is Steve and Andrea to tell you a little bit more about it.
Hi everyone, my name is Steve Clark. This is my beautiful and talented bride, Andrea Baker.
That wasn't on here. Hi there, Steve and I feel. Check. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. Hi, everybody. This is a fun time to see everybody here. Steve and I are privileged to have been asked to head up the safety and security effort to keep our UULC members and the facility safer in an emergency situation, such as medical, fire, storm, etc. Steve is a retired firefighter. He was a captain. He worked for 31 years in Fairfax, Virginia, and he has a lot of really cool stories. And he also worked as a fire inspector in the fire marshal's office, also in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm a registered architect. I started out designing small churches, and then I worked for about 29 years in corporate and then government facilities. So our goal is to identify, modify, and fix any deficiencies in the facility. Like any journey, it starts with one step. So our first step was to create some safety and evacuation plans that we're still in the process of editing, and you'll start to see them rolling out on doors to familiarize us with how to get out in an emergency situation. Another first step is to apply for a Homeland Security grant. Steve's already been in touch with our SLED representative, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and he's received an application. It's due early next year. If it's accepted, it could pay for things like a new fire alarm system, door security, video cameras, communication systems, and more. Some of these things, you might not notice some of the changes that we make, but what you will notice is some training opportunities.
So that's right, Andrea. So training is a good word, but I like to call it familiarization classes. So if we can be familiar with something, it's less scary. So can I show a hand? So a sign of hands of, does anybody know where the AED is in the church? Okay, that's good. And another show of hands of how scary is that, right? So if we have classes on the AED, how it works, when to use it, how it's not so scary, it might even save a life. Things like that. Someone's got to call 911 in an emergency. What the people on the other end that you're talking to, what they would like to know. specifics to make the emergency go better. How to use a fire extinguisher. Everybody's got a fire extinguisher underneath their kitchen sink, I'm sure. So there's an acronym, PASS, right? Pull the pin, aim it, squeeze the trigger, and sweep it. But we can get some old fire extinguishers. We can go outside and practice it. It won't be so scary. Different things like that. So we're going to have fun doing it. It's not going to be hard. It's just familiarization. There's a lot of cool things we can do, and we're going to put bulletins in the. Dave is going to help us with the weekly bulletin and stuff like that. So, where am I on this? We're going to do things like label the doors. So in case an alarm goes off, we can say, okay, you guys go to door number B. You guys go to door number C. And that way everybody's not trying to go out one door and the congestion will happen. Things like that. The biggest safety issue we have in any building is fire. So whoever's working in the kitchen, you might get a little bit more attention on how to close a door in case there's someone leaves oil on the stove, which isn't supposed to happen ever, but it might. What to do in that case. So it'll be fun. We'll have a good time. So with that, I'll give it back to my beautiful bride, Andrew.
Thank you, everybody. We are looking for volunteers, people to help us with this effort, so please contact us. We'll be outside in the foyer after church, so just come approach us or talk to David. He can probably get you in touch with us, too, if you have ideas. And looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Angela. Andrea, for your giving spirit and your heart behind this. And I think you'll have a good, solid handful of people here wanting to join you. It's great to have you. It's been just a little over a year, I think, since you've been a part of us, and already you're making a great impact. That's pretty cool. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to invite to this pulpit Frye Gaillard. Frye and Jane have been with us in the past. They have a connection with the Charlotte Observer. I've worked with them in the past for a number of years. Frye has recently retired from a position at the University of Southern Alabama, where he lectured there on a regular basis. Frye and Jane have been with us, as I said, in the past. Their one claim to fame is that they're Pat Jobe's good friends. and for that reason, they are our good friends, too. And so thank you both for being here. Frye, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. In keeping with the theme that Jane and I are going to be talking about this morning, which is hope in dark times, I was thinking back to a lecture I heard in Charlotte a few years back by Jane Goodall. And she was talking about how she deals with what she called her eco-grief. And by that she meant her occasional bouts with despair over what is happening to the planet, that she has worked so hard for all of her life to try to help people see in a more inclusive and nurturing kind of way. And I have written a little piece about Goodall in my memory of actually getting to meet her very briefly on that occasion. But this is a piece of it, 2 paragraphs of it that I'm going to share this morning. In her efforts to spread her message, Jane Goodall has lobbied not only heads of state and corporate polluters and companies using animals in their research, she also meets as often as she can with children. This, she says, is the place to plant the seeds of understanding, an epiphany that came in 1991 as she hosted a group of 12 students in Tanzania. They met at her home in Dar es Salaam to talk about their fears for the planet. At first, they said they felt overwhelmed. The problems were simply too large. But the more they talked, the more they decided that each of them could try to do something. And if enough people around the world did the same, maybe their efforts would multiply. Maybe their example might trickle up. Out of that conversation, in which Goodall listened as much as she spoke, came the idea for Roots and Shoots, an educational program for young people ranging in age from preschool to college. With the help of teachers and other mentors, the students could take on specific problems, environmental, humanitarian, but something more manageable than saving the world. And perhaps in the end, the world could be saved. For Goodall, this became her mantra of possibility, a metaphor of hope, roots and shoots that became a common refrain in her speeches. Roots creep deep underground, she said, everywhere, and make a firm foundation. Shoots seem very weak, but to reach out to the light, they can break open brick walls.
Thank you, Frye. Frye and I are going to be challenged with the microphone here today, so please be patient with us while we get it to the right height or the right lowness. Take your hymnals in your hands. If you would, please turn with me to hymn number 360. And if you're willing and able, please stand and may we sing together, Here We Have Gathered.
One thing we do here is we give to the food pantries, one on Hilton Head and one in Bluffton. If you have brought a non-perishable gift of food, please put it on the back table. You'll see some donations already there. And as you come in or as you leave the sanctuary. And now we will pass the basket for the support of this congregation and its work in the community. Thank you for your generosity.
Before we turn this over to the joys and concerns, there's an announcement that I need to make to this congregation. Many of you know and love Cheryl McCarthy, of course, and some of you do not know that her mother passed away yesterday, early today. I'm not entirely sure. Yesterday, is that right? So I know that you, as the members of this congregation and know Cheryl and know her work here, would be heartbroken with her. And as the time goes on and we discover more about what the plans are and schedules, we'll make sure that you know it. So I did want to make this announcement from the pulpit. Thank you. Cheryl? Or Tish?
Good morning. This is the part of the service where we share our joys and our concerns. And our joys are enhanced when we share them, and our concerns are less painful. So if you have something to share, you need to know that there are no political announcements nor statements. If you want to share something, please come forward, give us your name, take a stone from the basket and place it in the carom. Tell us your joy and concern. And this part of the service is not a live stream. Anybody? I have 2 stones for the joys and concerns that remain in our heart. you would turn to number 473, Affirmation, and read it with me. And first I have to put on my glasses so I can read it. Thank you. Okay, love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to invite Frye and Jane to the pulpit to speak on their subject of how to be a community of hope in dark times, and goodness knows we need to hear this on a regular basis. Again, it's a privilege to have these two back with us today, and to know their relationship with us is deep and sweet. So Frye and Jane, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Charlie. In 1853, a Unitarian minister named Theodore Parker delivered a sermon designed to buoy the spirits of his fellow abolitionists. As attitudes hardened in the slave-owning South and the nation, it seemed, lurched toward a civil war, these were the words that Theodore Parker spoke. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. More than 100 years later, on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, Dr. Martin Luther King sort of edited and streamlined that quote to say, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." It was a beautiful metaphor of inspiration and hope, and not only of possibility, but of a kind of mystic certainty that things would turn out the way they should. But 3 years later, in April of 1968, Dr. King was no longer sure in his mind, at least, that he believed this. In his private moments, he was battling with a deep sense of despair. He had concluded that the majority of white Americans were racist. He had seen deeper divisions in the country and even a drift toward violence. And what we didn't all know at the time was that the most inspirational figure of the civil rights years was caught in his own private cycle of despair. In my book, A Hard Rain, America in the 1960s, I wrote about that moment, April 3rd, 1968, which turned out to be the last speech that Martin Luther King ever gave. In Memphis, Dr. King threw his support behind a wildcat strike of sanitation workers. Their slogan was, "I am a man." What they meant was simple. They worked hard at a thankless, dirty job that was essential to their city. For this, they expected to be paid a living wage. But the city of Memphis refused to budge. The mayor fired the strikers. To King, this was precisely what he was talking about: economic exploitation compounded by racial condescension and prejudice. And King was happy to be involved with the sanitation strike. On March 18th, he flew to Memphis and spoke to a crowd of some 15,000 people. He also agreed to return and lead a march. 10 days later, the march began peacefully with King and his friend James Lawson at the head of the line. But as the procession stretched out along Beale Street, young African Americans at the rear began smashing windows of neighborhood stores. Police arrived quickly and attacked not only the violent mob, but also the ranks of peaceful demonstrators. In the pandemonium, several of King's aides insisted on getting him to safety, and a shaken Dr. King agreed. He was already feeling emotionally drained, overextended, unable to sleep, more obsessed than usual with the continuing reports of threats on his life. The next day, newspapers reported not only that the march had turned violent, But with information planted by the FBI, some pundits jeered at King's inglorious flight from the scene. The Memphis Commercial Appeal ran an editorial cartoon with the caption, "Chicken a la King." In a conversation with Ralph Abernathy, his closest friend in the movement, King wondered if his time had passed. Maybe, he said, we just have to admit that the day of violence is here, and maybe we have to just give up. Multiple biographers and historians have sought to describe the depths of King's despair during this fateful Memphis crusade. But nowhere was his mood more evident than in his own words in the speech that he gave on the night of April 3rd. He had not even wanted to be there. He had a sore throat and sent Ralph Abernathy in his place, but the crowd would have none of it. They wanted Dr. King. So in a driving rainstorm, he made his way to Masonic Temple and delivered a dark and brooding speech, remembering the various attempts on his life, including in 1958 when a woman had stabbed him in the chest. And that very morning, a bomb threat had delayed his flight to Memphis. He was tired of living with that weight, he said, but he was happy. That was the word he used. To be part of this moment in history, to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who were suffering. As King moved toward the close of his speech, it was as if the torrent of emotions inside him were welling simultaneously to the surface. The depth of his sadness about the state of the country, his doubts about his own leadership, and a fear that he might soon be killed. But there was also a faith that he was able to summon in what became known as his mountaintop speech. I just want to do God's will, he said, and he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. So what we have there, it seems to me, and Martin Luther King was murdered the next day at his Memphis hotel, is that even as the nation descended into grief and rioting and rage, we also knew, even at the time, that Dr. King had summoned from the depth of his despair a great leap of faith, a belief that the forces of light and love could and would, in fact, prevail at least someday, and that we must not give up hope. I thought of that as a kind of real-life parable, a historical parable, that may be applicable to what seemed to me to be the very dark times that we are living in today. Our nation, once again, is beset by violence, division. Our system of democracy hangs in the balance. Our planet is living through the hottest summer on record, and maybe some scientists say the hottest in 100,000 years. So where do we find inspiration and hope? One of the great metaphors in the Bible, it seems to me, is the idea of the Word becoming flesh, of people whose lives embody the sense of possibility and the sense of hope that the rest of us need in order to endure. I think of Jane Goodall finding solace in what she called her eco-grief by making common cause with the children. And I also, closer to home, thought of something that happened recently in the state of Tennessee. We had two young African-American legislators, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, the two Justins the media began to call them. They were both 27 years old, which was, interestingly to me, the same age as Dr. King was when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. Justin Pearson and Justin Jones made common cause with a group of grieving and traumatized children from Nashville schools because there had been a mass shooting in Nashville, one of way too many that we have in this country. The shooting was at a predominantly white Christian school, mostly conservative white parents who sent their children to that school. None of these ideological or racial differences mattered to Justin Pearson or Justin Jones at all. They led a demonstration on the floor of the Tennessee House of Representatives with these young people, almost all of whom in that moment were white. And they were expelled from the Tennessee legislature for doing this. During the controversy that followed, Justin Jones was on a trip out of town, and he was going through the Newark airport. And who did he run into but Joan Baez, that folk singer and apostle of hope from an earlier time. And together, the two of them in the airport joined hands and sang a verse and the chorus of We Shall Overcome. And I thought about that because Joan Baez is said to understand and feel deeply in her bones the disappointments of having hoped for so much when she was young and seeing how far we still have to go now that she's 82 years old. And yet they sang that song, We Shall Overcome Someday. And I think they were reaching out across the generations to each other to say that the forces of darkness, of violence, of despair are strong, and they are still with us. And so we have to be strong too, the forces of love and light. And I think they were saying and reminding each other that if we do that, we shall overcome someday. Thank you.
Frye has inspired you just now with true stories of people who have overcome their own despair. Do I need to start over?
Perfect.
Go ahead. Frye has inspired you just now with true stories of people who have overcome their own despair and taken heroic action in the face of situations that might overcome lesser mortals. I'm here with the rest of the story, the part about those of us who see the hard realities and freeze. Those of us with the urge to deny what we see, to hide from its implications, to flee into our favorite distraction. Maybe it's just me, but I suspect I'm not the only one who sometimes has the impulse to give up. Mind you, mostly I'm good in a crisis. I keep a level head, search for practical solutions, take appropriate action. But when the personal crises pile up too high, too quickly, or when a national or even global crisis looms and the task of fixing it seems hopeless, well, sometimes I crumple. After all, what can one little person do? One of the first times I felt this way was back in the early 70s, when I was a teenager and still confident that the world was destined to get better and better. But then I saw a science fiction movie called Silent Running. Wasn't as popular as Star Wars, and probably little remembered, but it's haunted me ever since. Imagine a future when Earth has become so toxic that plants can no longer grow here. The few surviving forests have been sent into space inside giant geodomes and kept alive by a few human and robot caretakers. And then the order comes. Cost cutters have decided the domes aren't worth keeping anymore and all must be destroyed. Silent Running is the story of one man's desperate effort to save Earth's last remaining forest. The movie devastated me. At that point in my life, I spent a lot of time in the woods behind my house, accepting its gifts to my senses. The smell of dirt, the texture of lichen, the tickle of caterpillars on my arm, the whisper of a breeze through the leaves, the warm kiss of sunlight. I loved the woods, and the thought of them being gone forever brought me to tears. Could this possibly be our future? Would we ever be willing to forever lose the wonder of wilderness or the peace of a garden? Surely not. Those tears might have propelled me into a life of activism, of fighting to save our planet, or at least some corner of it. But here's what really happened. I froze. And the more I learned about pollution and deforestation and extinctions, the more paralyzed I became. I didn't see how I could possibly make a difference, so I didn't try. Just wept. That feeling of helplessness returned with the latest headlines. Global warming is happening even faster than scientists feared, and too little is being done to slow it. It threatens not just our forest, but global stability and even our survival as a species. Anxiety is on the rise, even among the young, who usually look to the future with hope. Most no longer expect a life better than their parents have known. Many are rejecting parenthood itself. These are kids I know. They're unwilling to bring children into what the world is becoming. And yet, we can't afford paralysis. We can't indulge in despair. We can only create a new, better future by imagining it, then working toward it. So how can we hold on to enough hope to make it happen? Here's the good news. We've got each other. See, our real task, our biggest challenge, is finding the collective will to hope, to share a dream, to make a covenant that together we will create a future that doesn't fill us with dread. Change comes through community, the kind of community that gathers in this space. Community gives us the power of numbers. It gives us the ability to hold one another up when we're unable to stand alone. In community, we can help one another see dangers clearly, no matter how much we as individuals would rather look away. We can share information and pay attention to what is happening near and far. I'm sure you've noticed that this is a rather warm summer, and no doubt you've heard about the massive heat wave in the southwest U.S. last month. But did you also notice that parts of South America also experience temperatures higher than 100 degrees, even though it's midwinter there? Or that parts of New York had a 1,000-year rainfall event? Do you know what scientists are saying? What policies our elected leaders are or are not proposing? You have a role to educate yourself, educate others, because denial and deliberate ignorance never save the day. Spread the word. It's a lot to take in. So if what you see is too discouraging, remember the wise advice of Mr. Rogers. Look for the helpers, for those people local and around the world who are making a difference. Light your own candle from theirs. The next step is to take whatever action you can, however inadequate it seems. One of my favorite authors, Ray Bradbury, wrote a great short story about a man who traveled back in time to the age of the dinosaurs, and he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. And that small act changed history. When he went back everything was different. I thought of that story when I recently saw this unattributed quote on the internet. When people talk about traveling to the past, they worry about radically changing the present by doing something small. But barely anyone in the present really thinks that they can radically change the future by doing something small. What can one person do to head off catastrophe? Whatever is in front of you, just do it, as Nike would say. Do what you can, no more, no less. Do it out of love for what is, not just fear of losing it. Do it as though a solution relies on you alone. But the truth is, you can't do it alone, and you don't have to. In the arms of community, you can dare to confront our worst fears for tomorrow. Take one step and tell others why and what you are doing. Spread the word about the dangers we face, not to provoke despair, but resolution. Gather allies wherever you can find them. Inspire the fearful. Energize the helpless. Shine light. Keep moving, keep hoping, make noise, kick pebbles. That's how the avalanche begins. Thank you.
Thank you, Frye and Jane. How many of you, by a show of hands, are feeling a little confused by what's going on in our world today? Okay. Back in the 1970s, late 1960s, early 1970s, a new genre of music began. Joanne, you took my sheet. There we go. It was called psychedelic soul. So we're going to attempt one of the classics of the psychedelic soul era that talks about our world as being a ball of confusion. And this is a deceptively difficult song, but we're going to do what we can here. And hold on, I'm tangled. And this features playing the bass, Mr. John Shepard. John, whenever you're ready.
People moving out, people moving in. Why? Because of the color of their skin. Run, 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 but you sure can't hide. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Vote for me and I'll set you free. Rap on, sister, rap on.
but the teacher. Segregation, determination, demonstration, integration, aggravation, humiliation, obligation to our nation, all confusion. Yeah, that's what the world is today. Hey, hey.
Sale of bills is at an all-time high. Young folks walking around with their heads in the sky. The city's ablaze in the summertime.
And oh, the beat goes on. Evolution, revolution, gun control, sound of soul, shooting rockets to the moon. Kids growing up too soon. Politicians say more taxes will solve everything.
And the band
played on. So round and around we go. Where the world's headed, nobody knows. Talking to you, ball of confusion. Oh yeah, that's what the world is today. Hey, hey.
Fear in the air, tension everywhere, unemployment rising fast, the Beatles' new record's gas. And the only safe place to live is on an Indian reservation.
And the band played on. Eve of destruction, tax deduction, city inspectors, bill collectors, bar clothes in demand, population out of hand, suicide, too many bills, hippies moving to the hills, people all over the world are shouting, end the war. And the band played on. All of confusion. Yeah, that's what the world is today. Hey, hey. All of confusion. All of confusion.
Just a moment, I was driving my mother's 1966 Dodge Dart, listening to the AM radio station, singing Ball of Confusion. Thank you for that time warp. You guys were great. I appreciate that. Frye and Jane, several weeks ago, I was listening to NPR. A very challenging interview was going on. I think he was on Point in that particular segment of the day. And they were being challenged, the speakers and the interviewers of On Point were being challenged by the hopelessness of the news that NPR was constantly giving. And one guy had called in to say, I'm not listening to you anymore because you don't offer hope. That is the challenge. The news is all hard and it is all difficult, but if it comes at us hopelessly, then we will resign. But when it comes at us with hope, we become a community. And so I want to thank the two of you for that message here. It resonates in my heart, it resonates in our hearts, and I thank you for your willingness to offer us a community of hope. Those of you that are unfamiliar with our congregation, we have a time of gathering together about 11:15. We'll meet back here for what we call our talk back, and we'll have a chance to speak with these two and ask them some pertinent questions and have them offer some deeper insights into their into their world. So I thank you for that. But want to know that you're welcome. And those of you that have never been here for Talkback, that's how you'll learn who you really are with each other. So thank you for coming. Frye, I believe you have closing remarks now. Jan.
A quote from Jared K. Anderson, who posts online as the crypto-naturalist. We seldom admit the seductive comfort of hopelessness. It saves us from ambiguity. It has an answer for every question. There's just no point. Hope, on the other hand, is messy. If it might all work out, then we have things to do. We must weather the possibility of happiness.
Now, would join together in extinguishing the chalice. While we extinguish this flame, we still carry in our hearts